you for inviting us, elets, today to speak with you. My name is Myles Hosford. I lead the security architecture function at AWS for Asia Pacific. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what AWS is and an introduction to our cloud security, and then talk a little bit about automation and how I think you can do more with less from a BFSI perspective. So first of all, it's important to say that security is job zero at Amazon. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Security is job zero. It's baked into everything that we do at Amazon Web Services. We have over 1 million customers on the platform, and what that means from a security perspective is we can take the lessons learned from over 1 million customers and pass that back on into the AWS platform for everyone to benefit from. Just like to stop there actually and take a step back for those who aren't familiar with what AWS is. We're actually a cloud, so AWS is a cloud service provider. We provide infrastructure to customers on demand. Oh, there we go. Great, thanks. A little bit of a technical difficulty there. So we provide infrastructure to customers on demand via the internet in a pay-as-you-go pricing model. So some benefits there for financial service organizations is that we can provision infrastructure very, very fast. So to give you an example, and it was mentioned earlier in one of the talks, cloud service providers can provision infrastructure in a matter of seconds, when traditionally that might be months. So prior to AWS, I worked with a number of leading global investment banks, and it wasn't rare for a server to be deployed into production in 6 months. And that's probably, people can probably resonate with that statement. So in Amazon, if you want 100 servers or 1,000 servers, we can provide that to you in a matter of minutes and seconds. A great point that was mentioned this morning in the Dimension Data talk is, customers should focus on what they do best. And the point made was, the world's biggest hotel chain, and I guess they were referring to Airbnb, they don't actually have any hotels or hotel rooms. Likewise, for the world's largest taxi firm, Uber, they don't actually own any taxis. They just have the infrastructure and the digital platform that allows them to essentially outsource that. And that's what we see in cloud. So, BFSIs shouldn't really be worrying about how to, operate, own, and manage their infrastructure. You can outsource that to someone like Amazon Web Services, which allows you as a customer just to focus on what you do best. So innovating, providing digital platforms for your customers, and moving into new markets. So from an AWS perspective, our infrastructure is available in 16 regions. We just launched the UK yesterday morning. We also have a region here available in India, in Mumbai. So we actually have physical data centers where you can deploy servers and databases and run your applications from Mumbai. We also have the concept of availability zones, which is essentially clusters of data centers which are fault tolerant and isolated from each other. So that allows you to build applications in a highly available mode that are fault tolerant and allow you to scale up very fast to meet your customers' demand and also scale down very rapidly to save cost. So I've talked a little bit about the benefits from it on-demand nature. Just quickly to touch on the pricing. The way that Amazon works, it's pay-as-you-go and on-demand. So you only pay for the resources you use, and when you don't use them or you terminate them, there's no further cost. So you pay per hour. So this is great from an application perspective. If you need to scale up, let's say, a marketing event or Christmas, and there's a lot of customers coming to your application, you can scale up, you incur the additional costs at that moment, then when you scale down, there's no more costs, and you don't have the overhead capacity for the rest of the year. So you haven't over-provisioned from an infrastructure perspective. So from a security perspective, I mentioned we have millions of customers, and from 1 million customers, we actually see 1 billion events a day, and that allows us to take the lessons learned, pass that back into the platform, and share that knowledge with our wider ecosystem. The platform itself is used currently by some of the biggest banks in the world, whether they're retail, commercial, or investment banks. We have a very wide range of customers running on us. And also companies like the military organizations and NASA, JPL, that put the rover robot on Mars, also runs production servers on Amazon Web Services. So if it's suitable for organizations like that, that should not really be a corner or edge case where the platform's not suitable for customers here. So just to describe the security model of Amazon, when you move to a cloud provider, you have to embrace the concept of a shared security responsibility model. So what that means is the cloud service provider like Amazon is responsible for some things, and the customer, so the BFSIs or a partner, are responsible for the remaining gaps. So in Amazon's case, we're responsible for the physical security of the data centers. We're also responsible for everything up to the hypervisor that runs the cloud. And then as soon as you launch a server as a customer, it becomes your responsibility to perform the security around that. And initially, that might sound quite daunting, but the security controls that you will use in the cloud are exactly the same that you would use in your on-premise environment. So to take an example, how you patch your current Windows servers, you would do that exactly the same in Amazon as you do it now. How you manage access to your operating systems, so how you secure your root account credentials, you do that exactly in the same way in Amazon as you do in your on-premise environment. So as you can see there, the bottom section, or the orange-yellow, is what Amazon's responsible for. So I mentioned the global infrastructure. We secure that. We secure any public endpoints that face the internet that we run. And then the customer is responsible for their workload. And it looks like it's a lot of blue there, which the customer is responsible for. But we don't leave you entirely on your own. We have a whole range of security services and controls that allow you to turn that blue color into a compliant green and very secure manner. So I mentioned Amazon runs the physical data center security and a number of other things. And quite often BFSIs ask me, how do we know what you're doing is secure? How do we know the controls that Amazon have in place meet the requirements set out by us by either regulators or government bodies? And this all comes back to our compliance program. So Amazon's actually the most certified cloud service provider. We have over 30 certifications and accreditations globally. But just like to point you out to 3 that I think are relevant for BFSIs as they move to the cloud. First of all is our ISO 27001 program, which attests that we have a strong information security management system in place and that we actually follow it. So I think the key there is that any customer in the world can have an information security management system, which will typically be a Word document that sits on a folder somewhere. Unless you actually follow that and can attest your controls via evidence, then you can't obtain ISO 27001. So that's a great place to start for customers who want to move to the cloud. And then finally, I think our SOC program, so Service Organization Controls, we provide reports 1 and 2, which actually go into details of all of our internal controls, how we meet them, and what evidence we provided to an independent auditor to actually give us that report. So Ernst & Young is our current auditor. They audit us once every 6 months, and we provide those reports to customers. So what I would say for BFSIs looking in to use the cloud is to obtain these reports from your service provider and use them as part of your due diligence. Very often, BFSIs send in security questionnaires, big spreadsheets with 500 controls in and ask us to fill them in. Typically, we can say or any cloud provider could give any answer they want into those spreadsheets. But really what underpins the assurance of that is a compliance framework like SOC or ISO 27001. So I would encourage you, if you're not already doing it, to review your vendor's compliance frameworks. So from a kind of a technical security perspective, we have a wide range of services at Amazon, covering things like networking, encryption, identity and access management, and also compliance. So I'll just touch very quickly on a number of those, and then I want to dive into some discussion around automation. So in the encryption space, we have a service called KMS. It's a key management infrastructure, which is run entirely by Amazon. The customer doesn't have to do anything apart from opting in. So KMS itself uses AES 256 encryption, which is industry standard symmetric key encryption. At the click of a button, our customers can perform data encryption at rest across their entire fleet just by clicking a checkbox. Now, if you were trying to do that in an on-premise environment with physical servers or even virtualized servers, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually perform encryption everywhere. So KMS makes that very easy. Amazon runs the key management infrastructure on highly durable storage. We generate the key material, we rotate it, and customers it's very easy to use KMS. For customers that actually want to use hardware security modules, maybe for processing banking transactions, we have 2 options there. You can either use your own if you have one in an on-premise environment, and you can connect to Amazon via a direct connect or a leased line. So that would provide you very low latency into Amazon. Or you can leverage our cloud HSMs, which are single tenancy, SafeNet Luna hardware modules provided directly to you as a customer. In the identity space, we have our own identity access management service called IAM. But for large enterprise customers, typically what we see is them federating their Active Directory into AWS. So they only have to manage the users and roles in one central place. But again, the great thing about Amazon is you have the flexibility to choose what you want. So we provide the building blocks of over 72 services, and then a customer then is free to choose the services that they want that will actually help them build their desired workload. So we have a number of services around compliance, but I'm just going to move over those because I want to talk about that in some detail in a moment. So out of our 72 services last week, we just launched a new service called AWS Shield. So last week was our annual conference called reInvent in Las Vegas, where we release our new services. AWS Shield is a DDoS protection service available to every customer of Amazon, whether you're the biggest bank or you're the smallest development firm, for free. So AWS Shield sits in front of our entire global infrastructure and provides layer 3, layer 4 DDoS protection for all of our customers for free. So if you're seeing anything like UDP, amplification attacks, or NTP relay attacks that are coming into your network to do any sort of DDoS, our edge perimeter will actually drop that traffic before it even reaches your workloads. So that's a great story. It's part of the global infrastructure, and every customer gets it for free by default. They don't have to opt in. It's just turned on already. So what's Amazon doing to enable BFSIs? So I personally and my wider team work with the majority of the financial institutions across APAC. We have a very large technology risk team, primarily made up from members of staff from former financial institutions. So I was previously leading technology risk at JP Morgan. Prior to that, I was the lead security engineer at UBS Swiss Bank out of Switzerland, and the rest of my team are also ex-CIOs, CTOs from places like Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Barclays. So we have a lot of experience in working with regulators across the region, either directly through direct engagement, working with the regulators on public policy, or via customers on understanding what their requirements are and how they actually map to AWS. Some additional help that we give financial or large enterprises is via an enterprise agreement. So if you're an individual and you come to Amazon and you sign up via the website, you would get what we call a click-through agreement, which is what we give to millions of customers, and typically that satisfies non-BFSIs. But for large enterprises or financial firms, we have the concept of an enterprise agreement, which actually contains legal language that enables you to move to the cloud faster to satisfy your regulatory commitments. And some of those items are things like regulatory supervision. So if the RBI, for example, wanted to perform an on-site inspection of AWS's data centers, we provide that in the form of an enterprise agreement to you as a customer. We also have a very extensive enterprise support program, which provides you 24/7 access to a support team with SLAs of no longer than 5 minutes for response times. So great services there for enterprises. So there's been some discussion this morning around automation. So I think a number of the talks have touched on automating incident response, which is a great thing. I want to talk about 3 things really very quickly. I think automation should be everywhere. If you still have humans accessing your production infrastructure, then you're introducing error. You're also introducing the chance of inconsistencies and human bias, and just generally, having humans having physical or console level access to production servers is introducing risks. So first of all, I'd just like to mention that when you build your infrastructure, you should be doing that in an automated way. So if you think about how an application gets deployed and it goes through a CI/CD pipeline, it gets peer reviewed and it gets pushed into various stages of a deployment lifecycle, with Amazon Cloud, you can do that in exactly the same way for your infrastructure, because infrastructure is treated as code. So when you build your infrastructure in Amazon, you can actually save that as a JSON text file, which is a text representation of your infrastructure. Now, if you want to make any changes to your infrastructure, you simply do that in the code, then you push that into a build pipeline. It gets peer reviewed in exactly the same way that the application change would be made, and then you push your change out to AWS via a service called CloudFormation. I think that's a great service. It reduces errors, it enforces consistency, and it removes human bias on deployments. Secondly, I'd like to talk about very quickly on automated incident response, as it was brought up in the panel discussion. If you can automate your incident response, then you're not relying on humans to actually receive an alert and perform an action. So let's take an example. If your BFSI was compromised on Saturday evening, 2 o'clock in the morning, someone's going to get paged. They typically will have to get out of bed, or if you've got a 24/7 SOC, it's going to be escalated to probably someone who's not in the office. And then there's going to be a root cause analysis and a length of time before you actually take remediation action. Using some tools that are available in Amazon Web Services, you can actually automate your entire incident response program. So if you detect a server's been compromised, you can actually write the playbook in automated code that says, if this is a production server and we detect it's compromised via some of our new threat intelligence tools, automatically flag that server as compromised, take a snapshot of the disk and terminate it, or wrap some firewall rules around it to prevent data exfiltration. And you can do that fully automated with response times of around 10 to 20 seconds. So I think that's also a great story from a security perspective. So I want to talk about automating security compliance because there's a lot of talk around big data, threat intelligence, next generation firewalls, and I think those are great products and should definitely be part of your story. But I just want to take a step back and talk about basic hygiene, basic security hygiene. Typically, if something goes wrong in your environment, it's because of a missing patch or vulnerability or a weak password or something very basic that's the root cause of that. And those controls actually get laid out for most organizations in their IT security policy. So I'm sure everyone in the room has an IT security policy. It probably contains their internal controls and hopefully has an element of mapping to external or regulatory controls. For example, if the RBI has some specific requirements around the use of encryption, typically organizations would have that as part of their IT security policy, which should be implemented. Now, the problem with IT security policies is typically they're just Word documents that lie on a folder somewhere, and people are supposed to read them and update them once a year, and then the IT security team probably does a check once a year against the developers to make sure that they're following it. So in my previous role, that's exactly what I did. I'd walk around the office once a year and ask the development teams if they had encryption on their file servers, if they had strong passwords, and everyone would kind of nod their heads and say yes, and I'd tick the box, and the whole assessment would look green. But you never really have the assurance that what the development team is actually telling you is true, and that's not maliciously. Maybe they just don't know the answer themselves, or they intended it to be true, and some change further down the line has actually changed the configuration of that. So that's the downfall of a static IT security policy. So in Amazon Web Services, we have a service called AWS Config Rules. Config Rules allows you to programmatically define your IT security policy. So I'm just going to take an example. If you look at the top line, all volumes should be encrypted. Now that's a statement. You'll probably find that in most IT security policies in any organization in the world, particularly for production or sensitive data. What you can do with AWS Config Rules is write that statement as a short piece of software or script or lines of code, and that will continuously run in your environment. So if you think about that for a second, you can take every single technical control in your IT security policy and program them as lines of code that run every morning, every hour, or on whatever predefined frequency you want. And when it detects a non-compliance, it can actually take action and automate the response. So to give you the example, if AWS Config Rules runs and detects a server running in production that doesn't have encryption, you can either notify your security team. You might want to go ahead and perform block-level encryption on the disk automatically using a key that you've already defined. Or you might want to take more aggressive action and just shut down that server straight away because it's not compliant with policy. Now, I work with customers across APAC that do a mixture of all of those. In the most extreme example, if someone launches a server into production and it doesn't use block-level encryption, if it doesn't use block-level encryption, then the server just gets terminated straight away. And that's the great thing about the cloud is everything's accessible via an API, and servers can come and go. You can terminate them and redeploy from your code pipeline. So just very quickly, this is what config rules would look like. You can see there that there's a number of compliant and non-compliant resources, and you can automate the actions. And you can write those rules based on industry guidelines like RBI. You can base them on your internal policies or align them against external best practice. For example, CIS, they have a lot of industry security guidelines. We have customers that actually have wrote config rules against each of those checks, and they know in real time, every minute of the day, that their environment is secure. So that's a great story. Just want to quickly talk on the partner ecosystem. So AWS has lots of native security controls, which I could talk about for the best part of a day. But we also have a very strong partner ecosystem that actually provide third-party products that allow you to use the AWS securely. So when I speak to BFSIs and they say that they're already using Checkpoint or Palo Alto or other firewalls, my answer is typically continue using them in the cloud. You're already familiar with that technology, and it'll allow you to move to the cloud faster, which allow your business to innovate and provide new products to your customers. So just to close, so I've spoke about the security that we have at AWS, but to just give you a taste of who's using us globally, most of the biggest banks in the world, stock exchanges, even regulators like FINRA in the US are running material production workloads on AWS. A little bit closer to home, and this is just a sample, by the way, of people who have agreed to have their logos on the slides. A little bit closer to home, DBS, Suncorp, Westbank, Maybank, most of the biggest banks across the region are running production, transactional banking on AWS in the cloud, which is great. So just to dive into a little bit of detail, DBS recently announced that they want to move 50% of its compute workload to the cloud by 2018. So that's great. 50% of all of its compute infrastructure should be running in the cloud by 2018. Suncorp want to move 2,000 applications as part of its migration into AWS, which will result in millions in cost saving and the closures of many of their data centers, and Amazon will just run those for them. Likewise, Capital One, which is the 4th biggest consumer bank in the US, they want to reduce the number of data centers from 8 to 3 in 2018, relying on the infrastructure provided by Amazon Web Services. So I just want to finish with a quote there from the CIO of Capital One. And this is actually, he said this a year and a half ago, but this has really kind of resonated and seconded and thirded by most of our customers across the world. So they really believe that when they work with the services provided by Amazon Web Services, they can be more secure in the cloud than they could have ever been in their on-premise infrastructure, purely because the way that our automation works, the 10 to 20 second response times on incident response and continuous compliance will give you that visibility into your workloads and hopefully give you a more secure environment all of the time. So that takes me to the end of my discussion. Told to just speed through that very quickly. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myles.
Thank you.
Please stay here for a minute, please.
Oh, okay.
I request Mr. Makesh Chandramohan, CISO of Aditya Birla Financial Services. So if you are in the hall, please present a memento to Mr. Myles for this amazing presentation from Amazon Web Services. Round of applause for him.